In the machinery of financial markets, timing is everything. A single minute can separate opportunity from loss. A single word can move billions, and in the space between a decision made and a decision announced, fortunes can shift in silence. What you're about to witness is not about what was said publicly. It's about what moved privately. It's about the 30 minutes when some information existed but was not yet shared. And it's about the question that follows. In those 30 minutes, did the data stay still or did it travel? It's 9:45 in the morning. The hearing room is configured for a significant witness. Additional press cameras have been positioned along both side walls. The witness table has been moved slightly forward. Security personnel stand near the exits. Jerome Powell, chair of the Federal Reserve, sits at the center of the witness table. He's wearing a dark blue suit and a patterned tie. In front of him, a microphone, a binder, 2 folders, and a glass of water. His hands rest on either side of the binder. His posture is upright, professional, calm. The chairman opens with a statement about the Federal Reserve's critical role in economic stability. He thanks Chairman Powell for his time and his service. He notes that today's hearing will focus on communication protocols and market integrity. Then he yields to the ranking member. The ranking member asks about recent inflation data. Powell responds with measured precision. He cites core PCE figures, monthly trends, and year-over-year comparisons. He says the Federal Reserve remains committed to its dual mandate. The ranking member asks about the labor market. Powell says employment remains strong, but is showing signs of normalization. He says wage growth has moderated. He says the data supports continued vigilance, but does not indicate immediate crisis. The ranking member yields. Representative Torres from New York asks about regional bank stress. Powell acknowledges that some institutions face liquidity pressures, but says the system remains sound. Torres asks if the Fed is monitoring specific institutions. Powell says the Fed monitors all institutions continuously. Torres asks if any are under heightened scrutiny. Powell says he cannot discuss individual institutions. Torres yields. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is sitting 4 seats from the center. She has a notepad open in front of her. 3 lines are already written. Her pen is uncapped. She's watching Powell, her expression neutral and focused. The chairman looks at his roster and says, "The chair recognizes Representative Ocasio-Cortez." AOC picks up her pen. She doesn't write immediately. She looks at Powell and says, "Chairman Powell, thank you for being here." Powell nods, "Thank you." AOC pauses. Then she says, "On November 7th of this year, the Federal Open Market Committee concluded a scheduled policy meeting. Is that correct?" "Yes." "What time did the meeting conclude?" "Approximately 1:45 p.m. "And the policy decision was announced at what time?" 2:15 p.m. as scheduled. "So there was a 30-minute window between the conclusion of the meeting and the public announcement?" "Yes, that's standard procedure. We finalize the statement and prepare for the press conference." AOC writes something on her notepad. Then she says, "During that 30-minute window, how many people had access to the policy decision?" Powell says, "FOMC members, of course, and essential support staff." "How many support staff?" "Approximately 15 to 20 depending on the specific roles required. And these individuals are bound by confidentiality protocols." "Yes, very strict protocols." "Have those protocols ever been breached?" "Not to my knowledge." AOC sets her pen down, both hands flat on the table. "Chairman Powell, on November 7th between 1:45 and 2:15 p.m., did anyone outside the Federal Reserve have access to the policy decision?" Powell shifts slightly. "No." "You're certain?" "Yes." "No communications were made to Treasury?" "Not before the public announcement." "No communications to the White House?" "No." "No communications to any congressional offices?" "No." "No communications to any financial institutions?" "Absolutely not." AOC picks up her pen again. She writes 1 line. Then she says, "Chairman Powell, are you aware of market activity that occurred on November 7th between 1:45 and 2:15 p.m.? Powell says, "Markets are active during trading hours." "I'm asking about specific activity during that 30-minute window. I'm aware that markets moved after our announcement. I'm not asking about after. I'm asking about before." Powell pauses. "I'd need to know what specific activity you're referring to." AOC reaches beside her and picks up a document. It's a single page with multiple columns of numbers. She says, "This is a trade activity log from November 7th. It shows that at 1:52 p.m., 7 minutes after your meeting concluded, and 23 minutes before the announcement, the 10-year Treasury yield dropped 11 basis points in 90 seconds. Were you aware of that?" Powell says, "I became aware of unusual pre-announcement activity." "Yes. When did you become aware?" "Shortly after the announcement." "Who informed you?" "Market surveillance staff." "And what did you do with that information?" "We noted it for review." "Did you investigate?" "We don't have authority to investigate individual trades. That falls under SEC and CFTC jurisdiction." "Did you inform them?" Powell pauses. "We share relevant market information with regulatory partners through established channels." Did you specifically inform them about the November 7th activity? I'd need to check our communication logs. AOC writes something else. Then she says, Chairman Powell, 11 basis points in 90 seconds. That's a significant move. Markets can be volatile during anticipation periods, but this was 23 minutes before the announcement. Speculation exists ahead of scheduled announcements. Can speculation move markets that precisely? Powell says, markets aggregate many different views, but this wasn't gradual. This was 90 seconds. I can't speculate about individual market movements. AOC sets her pen down. She's looking at the document now. Then she says, Chairman Powell, the yield moved down. That suggests markets anticipated an accommodative decision. And 23 minutes later, you announced you were holding rates steady. The market had already priced it in. How? Powell says, market participants analyze data independently. The same data you analyzed. Yes, and they reached the same conclusion. The data was publicly available, but your discussion wasn't. Our discussion is never public until the statement is released. AOC picks up her pen again. She writes 2 lines. The room is quieter now. The chairman is leaning forward slightly. Representative Torres has stopped checking his phone. AOC says, let me ask about something else. On November 7th, before the meeting began, did you brief anyone outside the FOMC about the likely decision? Powell says, no. You briefed no one. Correct. Not Treasury officials? We coordinate with Treasury on many matters, but we don't preview FOMC decisions. Not even the Secretary. Especially not the Secretary. Why especially? To maintain independence. AOC writes something. Then she says, on November 6th, the day before the meeting, did you have any scheduled meetings or calls? Powell says, I have many meetings and calls. With anyone outside the Federal Reserve? Possibly. I'd need to review my calendar. Your staff can provide that? Powell nods to someone behind him. A staff member approaches and whispers something. Powell listens, then says to AOC, I had 2 calls that day. One with the Treasury Secretary, one with the head of the European Central Bank. What time was the Treasury call? Late afternoon, around 4:30 p.m. What was discussed? General economic conditions. Coordination on international matters. Was the upcoming FOMC meeting mentioned? It may have been mentioned in passing. In what context? In the context of scheduled events, not in terms of likely outcomes. But you discussed economic data. We always discussed economic data. The same data the FOMC would consider the next day. Yes. And what did that data suggest? Powell pauses. The data was mixed, leaning in any particular direction. The data suggested conditions were stabilizing, which would support holding rates steady. That's one possible interpretation. AOC sets her pen down. She looks at Powell. So on November 6th, you discussed economic data with the Treasury Secretary. That data suggested stabilization. The next day, the FOMC held rates steady. And 7 minutes after that decision was made but 23 minutes before it was announced, the market moved as if it already knew. Powell says, those are separate events. Are they? Yes. The room is very quiet now. Someone in the press section has stopped typing. The cameras are completely still. AOC picks up her pen again. She writes 1 line. Then she says, Chairman Powell, after the unusual trading activity was noted, did anyone at the Federal Reserve review the access list for November 7th? Powell says, we have standard protocols for reviewing access. Did you follow them? Yes. What did you find? We found that all protocols were followed. But did you identify everyone who had access to the decision during that 30-minute window? The staff involved are part of the regular FOMC support team. How many people is that? As I mentioned, 15 to 20. Do you have a list of their names? We maintain personnel records, yes. Can you provide that list to this committee? Powell pauses. I'd need to consult with counsel about personnel privacy. We're not asking for personal information. We're asking who had access to market-sensitive information. I understand, but there are privacy considerations. AOC writes something on her notepad. Then she says, Chairman Powell, of those 15 to 20 staff members, how many have left the Federal Reserve since November 7th? Powell says, I don't have that information, but you could obtain it. Yes. Have any of them taken positions in the private sector? I don't track individual career movements, but the Federal Reserve has ethics offices that do. Yes. Can you check? Powell looks at the staff member behind him. They whisper briefly. Powell turns back to AOC and says, I can have that information compiled. AOC nods. She writes something else. Then she says, let me ask about the trading activity itself. You said you became aware of it shortly after the announcement. Yes. Who specifically informed you? The head of market surveillance. At what time? Around 2:45 p.m., 30 minutes after the announcement. Yes. Why did it take 30 minutes? The surveillance team was reviewing data. They were reviewing data while unusual activity was occurring. They review data continuously. But they didn't flag the activity until after the announcement. They flagged it when they confirmed it was unusual. AOC sets her pen down. 11 basis points in 90 seconds isn't immediately unusual? Powell says, context is important. They needed to verify the magnitude and timing. How long does verification take? Depends on the complexity. In this case, I don't know the exact timeline of their internal process. AOC picks up her pen again. She taps it once on the notepad, then she says, Chairman Powell, do you monitor communications made by FOMC members during meeting days? Powell says, we maintain logs of official communications. What about personal communications? Personal calls and messages are not monitored. So an FOMC member could theoretically make a phone call during the 30-minute window, and there would be no record. FOMC members understand confidentiality requirements, but there would be no record. Correct. Do you know if any FOMC member made any calls between 1:45 and 2:15 on November 7th? I wasn't monitoring their personal communications, but it's possible. Powell pauses. It's possible, but it would violate our protocols. Has anyone checked? We trust our members to follow protocols. That's not what I asked. Has anyone verified that no calls were made? Powell doesn't respond immediately. Then he says, we conducted a standard protocol review, which includes checking phone records. It includes reviewing access and behavior consistent with protocols, so you didn't check phone records. We don't routinely monitor personal devices. AOC leans forward slightly. So you can't confirm that no FOMC member communicated the decision before the announcement. Powell says, I can confirm that all members are bound by strict rules and are expected to follow them. Expected, but not verified. We rely on professional conduct. And when the market moves 11 basis points before the announcement, you still rely on professional conduct rather than verification. Powell doesn't respond. The chairman shifts in his seat. Representative Torres is writing something quickly. The press section is completely silent. AOC writes one more line on her notepad. Then she says, Chairman Powell, let me ask about November 6th again. Your call with the Treasury Secretary at 4:30 p.m. How long did it last? Powell says, approximately 30 minutes, and it ended around 5 p.m. Yes, after your call, did the Secretary have any other meetings that day? I don't track his schedule, but he could have. I assume he has a full schedule like most officials. Could he have met with private sector representatives after your call? I have no knowledge of his schedule after our call. AOC reaches beside her and picks up another document. This one is thicker, several pages stapled together. She says, this is a visitor log from the Treasury Department for November 6th. It shows that between 5:15 and 6:30 p.m., the Secretary met with representatives from 4 financial institutions. Were you aware of that? Powell says, no. The institutions are Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Citadel, and Wellington Management. Do you recognize those names? Of course. Are they active in Treasury markets? They're major market participants, and the Secretary met with them 75 minutes after discussing economic data with you, if that's what the log shows. The data you discussed suggested stabilization, among other things. And the next day, the FOMC held rates steady, based on our analysis of all available data, and 7 minutes after that decision, before it was announced, the market moved. Powell says nothing. AOC sets the document down. She writes something on her notepad. Then she says, Chairman Powell, did you know the Secretary was meeting with those institutions after your call? No. If you had known, would it have concerned you? It's not unusual for Treasury to meet with market participants, but the timing. I can't comment on Treasury's meeting schedule. I'm asking if the timing would concern you. Powell pauses. The timing of what? Discussing data that suggests policy direction, then that official immediately meeting with market participants, then the market moving before the announcement. Those events aren't necessarily connected. But they could be. Speculation doesn't establish causation. AOC leans back. She's looking at her notepad now. Then she says, Chairman Powell, after you were informed of the unusual trading activity, what specific actions did you take? Powell says, I directed staff to document the activity and review our protocols. Did you contact the SEC? Our standard communication channels were used. Did you personally contact the SEC chair? I don't recall making a direct call. Did anyone from the Fed make a direct call that day? I'd need to check communication logs. But you don't remember anyone making an urgent call to report 11 basis points moving in 90 seconds before a major policy announcement? We followed standard procedures, which are documenting the activity and sharing information through established channels. How quickly? Within normal timeframes. What's a normal timeframe? It varies depending on the nature of the information. In this case, I'd need to check the specific timeline. OOC picks up her pen. She writes 2 lines. The room is frozen now. No one is moving. The chairman has his hand near his gavel but hasn't touched it. OOC says, Chairman Powell, you've said multiple times that you'd need to check logs, check timelines, check records. Why don't you have this information now? Powell says, this hearing covers a wide range of topics. I can't anticipate every specific question, but you knew we'd discuss November 7th. Yes, and you knew there was unusual trading activity. Yes, and you didn't think to bring those records? Powell pauses. I can provide them subsequently. Subsequently. Not today. I want to ensure accuracy. You can't confirm accuracy of your own actions on November 7th. I want to provide complete information rather than incomplete recollections. OOC sets her pen down. She places both hands flat on the table. Let me ask one final question. Powell waits. His expression hasn't changed, but his hands have moved closer to the binder. OOC says, Chairman Powell, between 1:45 and 2:15 p.m. on November 7th, when the market moved 11 basis points before your announcement, you were in the building. You've confirmed no external communications were made. You've confirmed all staff followed protocols. But you can't verify phone records. You can't confirm whether you contacted the SEC that day, and you can't provide the access list without consulting counsel. So I'm going to ask you very directly, do you know for certain that the information stayed inside the building during those 30 minutes? Powell's mouth opens slightly, then closes. His hands are on the binder now, both of them, flat on the cover. He looks at AOC, then at the chairman, then at the document in front of him. He says, our protocols are designed to prevent. That's not what I asked. I asked if you know for certain. The silence is absolute. Powell's hands remain on the binder. The cameras are recording. The press section is motionless, and no answer comes.